Cell structure and function. Cytology is the branch of science which deals with the structure, function, and chemical reactions going on inside the cells. Learning objectives. Identify the structure and functions of basic component cells. Differentiate between animal cells and plant cells. Human beings are complex organisms made of trillions of cells which vary in their size and structure. They are organized into different forms and carry out specific functions. Improved technology has helped biologists to study the organism's cellular structure and function. They have even found ways to modify cellular structures and manipulate gene expressions for the enhancement of human health and environment. Robert Hooke discovered cell in the mid-17th century with a simple microscope and marked the genesis of an exciting era of cellular biology. A cell is the smallest unit of life and the building block of all living organisms. Understanding what makes up the cell and how a cell works is fundamental to all the biological sciences such as biotechnology, genetic engineering, and molecular biology. So let's begin with whole organisms and work down to the molecular level. Organisms are made up of the organs system, such as the digestive system pictured here. Each of these organ systems are comprised of individual organs which work together in a coordinated manner. The organs such as liver, stomach, small and large intestines are a part of the digestive system. All these organs are made up of tissues. Tissues are groups of similar cells that perform the same function, such as the epithelial tissue and the smooth muscle tissue pictured here. Tissues are made up of cells, and the cells are the smallest units of life. Finally, cells contain organelles and molecules such as DNA. Cells are classified into two types on the basis of their structure: prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are the simpler forms of cells which make up unicellular organisms like bacteria and cyanobacteria. Prokaryotic cells lack membrane-bound nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles. The DNA, which is usually a single circular molecule, floats inside the cytoplasm of the cell. On the other hand, eukaryotic cells make up complex multicellular organisms like plants and animals. The eukaryotic cellular structure is more complex as pictured here. They have a nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles. Animal cells are the foundation of all animals. Let's examine an animal cell more closely. Animal cells are protected by a phospholipid bilayer that surrounds the cell and functions as a gate that allows the entry and exit of molecules from the cell. In the center of the cell lies the nucleus. Nucleus acts as a brain of the cell. Each and every metabolic activity of the cell is regulated by the nucleus. It contains the DNA in the form of chromatin and a nucleolus. Cells contain a number of small double membrane-bound organelles called mitochondria. They are the powerhouses of the cell and carry out aerobic cellular respiration to generate ATP, which is the energy currency of the cell. Ribosomes are small globular bodies found in large numbers inside the cells. They are known as the protein factories of the cells as they carry out the synthesis of proteins inside the cells. Ribosomes may be free or attached to the endoplasmic reticulum. Endoplasmic reticulum forms an interconnected network of tubules and vesicles and functions to transport proteins throughout the cells. Golgi apparatus is the system of membranous sacs called cisternae. The purpose of Golgi apparatus is to transport secretory vesicles and form lysosomes. Lysosomes are the suicidal bags of the cell. They contain digestive enzymes and perform intracellular digestion. Another type of eukaryotic cell is the plant cell. Both the types of cells are very similar, but there are three distinct differences. Firstly, plant cells have a tough cell wall around their cell membrane, while animal cells lack a cell wall. Secondly, plant cells have a large central vacuole, whereas animal cells may have a few small ones. Vacuoles are single membrane-bound organelles which are required for the purpose of storage and waste accumulation. The final difference is the presence of chloroplast in the plant cells. Chloroplasts are the green-colored double membrane-bound organelles which carry out photosynthesis for the plant.
Cells are the smallest living units of an organism. All cells have three things in common, no matter what type of cell they are. All cells have a cell membrane, which separates the inside of the cell from its environment, cytoplasm, which is a jelly-like fluid, and DNA, which is the cell's genetic material. There are two broad categories of cells. The first category is eukaryotic cells. They have organelles, which include the nucleus and other special parts. Eukaryotic cells are more advanced, complex cells, such as those found in plants and animals. The second category is prokaryotic cells. They don't have a nucleus or membrane-enclosed organelles. They do have genetic material, but it's not contained within a nucleus. Prokaryotic cells are always one-celled or unicellular organisms, such as bacteria. So, what are organelles? Organelle means little organ. Organelles are the specialized parts of a cell that have unique jobs to perform. Let's start with the nucleus, the control center of the cell. The nucleus contains DNA, or genetic material. DNA dictates what the cell is going to do and how it's going to do it. Chromatin is the tangled, spread-out form of DNA found inside the nuclear membrane. When a cell is ready to divide, DNA condenses into structures known as chromosomes. The nucleus also contains a nucleolus, which is a structure where ribosomes are made. After ribosomes leave the nucleus, they will have the important job of synthesizing or making proteins. Outside the nucleus, the ribosomes and the rest of the organelles float around in cytoplasm, which is the jelly-like substance. Ribosomes may wander freely within the cytoplasm or attach to the endoplasmic reticulum, sometimes abbreviated as ER. There are two types of ER. Rough ER has ribosomes attached to it, and smooth ER doesn't have ribosomes attached to it. The endoplasmic reticulum is a membrane-enclosed passageway for transporting materials, such as the proteins synthesized by ribosomes. Proteins and other materials emerge from the endoplasmic reticulum in small vesicles, where the Golgi apparatus, sometimes called the Golgi body, receives them. As proteins move through the Golgi body, they're customized into forms that the cell can use. The Golgi body does this by folding the proteins into usable shapes, or adding other materials onto them, such as lipids or carbohydrates. Vacuoles are sac-like structures that store different materials. Here, in this plant cell, the central vacuole stores water. Going back to the animal cell, you will see an organelle called a lysosome. Lysosomes are the garbage collectors that take in damaged or worn-out cell parts. They are filled with enzymes that break down this cellular debris. The mitochondrion is an organelle that is the powerhouse for both animal and plant cells. During a process called cellular respiration, the mitochondria make ATP molecules that provide the energy for all of the cell's activities. Cells that need more energy have more mitochondria. Meanwhile, the cell maintains its shape through a cytoskeleton. The cytoskeleton includes the thread-like microfilaments, which are made of protein, and microtubules, which are thin, hollow tubes. Some organisms, such as plants that are photoautotrophic, meaning they capture sunlight for energy, have cells with an organelle called a chloroplast. The chloroplast is where photosynthesis happens. It's green because it has a green pigment called chlorophyll. Plant cells also have a cell wall outside of their cell membranes that shape, support, and protect the plant cell. Animal cells never have a cell wall. There are many other unique structures that only some cells have. Here are just a few. In humans, for example, the respiratory tract is lined with cells that have cilia. These are microscopic hair-like projections that can move in waves. This feature helps trap inhaled particles in the air and expels them when you cough. Another unique feature in some cells is flagella. Some bacteria have flagella. A flagellum is like a little tail that can help a cell move or propel itself. The only human cell that has a flagellum is a sperm cell. In summary, remember, eukaryotic cells are plant and animal cells with a nucleus and membrane-enclosed organelles, while prokaryotic cells are unicellular organisms without these things. All cells have a cell membrane, cytoplasm, and genetic material. And even though only plant cells have chloroplasts, both plant and animal cells have mitochondria.
In this video, we're going to do a basic review of the cell and the things inside of the cell, like the organelles, the tiny organs of the cell. So first we have the nucleus, which is right there. And the nucleus is basically the command and control center of the cell. It tells the cell what to do, how to grow, what proteins to make, what lipids to produce, and things like that. Now, in the nucleus, in this region, you have long strands of DNA known as chromatin. And the DNA is basically the instruction manual or the blueprint of the cell. It stores the genetic information of the cell. And so within the DNA, you have the instructions on how to make the proteins, how to make the individual organelles of the cell, and what they need to do. Now, inside of the nucleus, we have this ball right here, and that is the nucleolus. Now, the nucleolus, it creates ribosomal RNA to make ribosomes. And ribosomes, you can see these little spheres floating in the cytosol. And the ribosomes, they make proteins. Now, the ribosomes consist of ribosomal RNA and proteins, but they manufacture proteins. Now, the way the nucleus makes proteins is that it sends mRNA or messenger RNA, which carries the instructions to the ribosome to make the specific type of protein that's needed for the cell. Now, the nucleus is surrounded by a membrane known as the nuclear envelope. And on this membrane, you'll find these holes on it, which are known as nuclear pores, and they allow stuff to go into and out of the cell. So the messenger RNA comes out of the nucleus through those nuclear pores. Now let's talk about the ER, the endoplasmic reticulum. There are two types. The first one is the rough ER, which is all of this in that region, and the second is the smooth ER, which is right here. Now, what do you notice about these two? What is the difference between them? The rough ER contains ribosomes. The smooth ER does not contain any ribosomes. So the rough ER, it assists in the production of proteins because ribosomes, that's what they do, they make proteins. Because the smooth ER doesn't have any ribosomes, it does not make any proteins. However, it does produces lipids, cholesterol, and hormones. It also assists in detoxification, which means it breaks down toxins. And the way it does so is by making these molecules more water soluble so that they can be easily removed from the body or excreted through the urine. Now let's go back to the rough ER. So once the rough ER, by means of the ribosomes, once they make the proteins are enclosed in a vesicle, and those vesicles get transported to the Golgi body, which is right there. Now, the Golgi body, it receives the vesicles, and it modifies the proteins that are in the vesicles. And the way it does so is by adding lipids and carbs to the proteins, and it can also fold the protein. It can give it the proper shape because the function of a protein is dependent on its shape. So once it modifies and processes the proteins, it exports the proteins out of the cell. So here is a visual illustration of what happens to a protein in a cell. Now granted, my drawing is not the best. This is an educational video and not an artist or a how-to draw video. And so the protein, it begins at the rough ER because that's where the ribosomes are. And remember, ribosomes, their job is to make proteins. So the protein, it leaves the rough ER by means of a transport vesicle. And you can see the protein inside of this vesicle. And it goes to the Golgi body for processing and modification. So looking at the protein now, you can see that it has a different shape. At the same time, you could see different colors added to it. So this represents the lipids and the carbs added to the protein. So once the protein has been tagged with those extra molecules, it gets exported out of the cell. So it travels to the cell membrane where it leaves the cell to perform the function that it needs to do. Now the transport vesicle that surrounds the protein, it fuses with the cell membrane, and so it becomes part of the cell membrane, causing the membrane to expand, or basically causing the cell to grow. Now let's talk about some other organelles that you need to know. The next one is the mitochondria. Now the mitochondria has its own separate DNA. It's different from the DNA of the cell. And its job is to perform cellular respiration. In that process, it takes the energy stored in fats and carbohydrates and converts it to a molecule known as ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Next up, we have the lysosome. Now the lysosome, which is here, its purpose is to break down food. It contains digestive enzymes, and in white blood cells, it can also destroy pathogens. When a white blood cell engulfs a pathogen in a process known as phagocytosis, the lysosomes in those white blood cells, it can break down those pathogens or disease-causing agents into smaller stuff that can be used or recycled by the cell. Next up, we have the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is basically the jelly-like fluid that is in the cell. So all of the organelles they're dissolved in the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm contains solutes like salts, electrolytes, and other stuff like carbohydrates, lipids, and free floating ribosomes and things like that. Now let's talk about the cytoskeleton. The function of the cytoskeleton is to maintain the shape of the cell. At the same time, it also provides structural support. Now the cytoskeleton consists of a network of 3 fibers. The first of which is the microtubules, the second is the microfilaments, and the third one, the intermediate filaments. Now how can we identify them in the cell? The microtubules is the largest of the 3 fibers. The microfilaments is the smallest of the 3 fibers. The intermediate filaments, in terms of size, it's somewhere in between the microtubules and the microfilaments. Now this picture really doesn't show it, but just know that the intermediate filaments, they're in between, and they provide mechanical support to the cell. Now the microtubules, they're made up of a protein called tubulin, and the microfilaments, they're made up of a protein called actin. The microtubules, their purpose is to provide structural support and transportation services to the cell. So vesicles, they can move from one part of the cell to another part by means of the microtubules. The microfilaments, they're involved in elongation and contraction, so they assist the cell to move. Next up, we have the centrioles. And here it is in the diagram. The centrioles are active during cell division. And during that time, they form something known as the mitotic spindle, which consists of microtubules. And what it does is during cell division, it pulls apart the chromosomes, thus allowing the cell to be split into 2. The chromosomes are basically a condensed version of chromatin, so they form during cell division. Now, here are some other terms that you need to be familiar with: cilia and flagella. These also play a role in the movement of a cell. Now, cilia consist of tiny, short, hair-like structures, and notice that there's many of them. Flagella consist of long, whip-like structures, and there's only a few of them. And so the flagella can propel a cell forward from one location to another. Now, these 2 structures, they're made up of microtubules. So microtubules, they're very useful in the movement of a cell. So far, we've been talking about animal cells. But now let's talk about the plant cell, because even though they are similar, the plant cell has some characteristics that are not found in the animal cell. The first of which is the presence of a very large vacuole. This vacuole stores water and nutrients, and at the same time, it provides structural support to the cell by means of the hydrostatic pressure that it generates. Now, another organelle that's found in the plant cell, but not in an animal cell, is the chloroplast. Now, the chloroplast is green due to a pigment known as chlorophyll, which plays a role in photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a process by which the plant takes sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, and it produces glucose and oxygen gas. Another feature that's present in plant cells but not in animal cells is the presence of a cell wall. Now, both the animal cell and the plant cell, they both contain a cell membrane. The cell membrane consists of a phospholipid bilayer, and it has a property known as selective permeability, which means that it allows some things to enter while preventing the passage of other things from coming into the cell. And it has these protein channels. Now, small molecules like oxygen gas and water, they can diffuse right into the plasma membrane. But large molecules like glucose and other stuff, they have to go through a protein channel. Even ions have to travel through channels as well. And so that's the function of the cell membrane. It's basically like the gate of the cell. It allows some things to enter while blocking the passage of other stuff from going into the cell. So that's basically it for this video. If you like it, don't forget to subscribe and click on that notification bell. Now, I do have some other content that might be of use to you. I do have playlists on algebra, trig, calculus, chemistry, physics. So if you're taking one of those courses, or if you plan to take it in the future, feel free to check out my channel and you might find what you're looking for. So that's it for this video. Thanks again for watching.